The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet farm. The sky, painted in shades of orange and pink, created a serene backdrop for what seemed like an ordinary evening. But nothing felt ordinary today. Ellie stood at the edge of the field, her heart in her throat. The familiar sounds of the barn, clucking hens, the distant moo of a cow seemed too far away. All her focus was on Charlie, the horse she had loved and cared for since she was a little girl. She had always known when something was wrong with him. After all, they had shared so many memories. His galloping beside her as she ran freely through the open fields. His soft nuzzles on her cheek when she was feeling down. They had grown up together, inseparable. And today that bond felt fragile, almost like a thread ready to snap. Ellie had never seen him like this. His movements were slow, sluggish even, and his once vibrant brown eyes seemed clouded with something she couldn't quite grasp. As she walked towards him, her heart began to pound. "Charlie," she whispered softly, trying to steady her breath. But the horse only looked at her for a brief moment, his body heaving in shallow breaths. A feeling of dread crept over her. Something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing his soft mane. But the touch was different today. No playful toss of his head, no nudge of affection. There was a weariness in his eyes that Ellie had never seen before. For a long moment, Ellie stood there, frozen, watching the horse's every movement. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the pleading look that seemed to say, "Help me." Ellie had always been able to read him, but this time, there was nothing to read except a deep, unspoken sadness. She crouched down beside him, whispering soothing words, hoping he would respond. But the silence that followed felt suffocating. Then out of nowhere, she noticed something strange. There was a faint glow in the distance. It wasn't like the light from the setting sun. It was too bright, too unnatural. Ellie squinted, her pulse quickening as she tried to make sense of the vision. The glow seemed to come from a spot in the far corner of the field, a place she had never really thought much about before, but now it seemed to pull her in, like an unseen force was guiding her there. Charlie whinnied softly, his body trembling under her touch, as if warning her. Ellie's heart raced. She had never seen him this scared. She gently tugged on the reins, trying to lead him away. But Charlie refused to move. His hooves dug into the ground, his body stiff with fear. And then, the earth beneath them seemed to vibrate ever so slightly, as if the ground itself had begun to awaken. There was something powerful, something ancient, about the energy she felt surrounding her. Ellie's eyes flicked back to the glowing light. What was it? Why had it appeared now, at this exact moment? She stood there, caught between the unspoken bond she shared with Charlie and the overwhelming force of the energy calling to her. The wind seemed to pick up, howling through the trees, and Ellie could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. But still she couldn't move. Charlie was now visibly trembling, his body tense, his eyes wild with fear. Ellie could feel her own fear, but she wasn't about to leave him behind. She placed her hand on his mane, trying to calm him, but the unease was spreading from him to her now. There was something pulling at her, drawing her toward the unknown light in the distance, something that felt too important to ignore. But why? Why now? As if in a trance, Ellie slowly walked toward the glow. The closer she got, the more the ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with energy. She felt an unfamiliar sensation rising from within her, like the earth itself was urging her to step forward, to uncover whatever lay hidden. When she reached the spot, her breath caught in her throat. The grass here was burned, scorched in an unnatural pattern, forming strange circles in the ground. No fire had touched this place. The soil, still warm to the touch, seemed to be alive with something unexplainable. Ellie's hand trembled as she knelt down to investigate. She brushed away the dirt, revealing something buried beneath, something smooth, round, and warm. She picked it up and immediately felt a surge of energy course through her hand. The stone was glowing softly, pulsing with a light of its own. It was as if the stone had been waiting for her. Confusion washed over her. What was this stone? What was happening to Charlie? She hadn't seen anything like this before. The air was thick with mystery, and every instinct in her told her to leave, to run back to the safety of the barn. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when this strange force seemed to have a purpose. Before she could fully process what was happening, a deep, hollow whisper filled the air, low and ancient. Ellie's blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from Charlie, nor from anything she could see. It was as if the land itself was speaking, its words a distant murmur that only she could hear. And just as suddenly the whisper ceased. Ellie stood frozen, clutching the glowing stone in her hand. Something had changed. She could feel it. The connection between her and Charlie had deepened, become something more than just a simple bond between a girl and her horse. It felt like the earth was shifting beneath her, preparing for something monumental, something that she wasn't sure she was ready for. Turning back, she called out to Charlie, who had started pacing nervously, his eyes darting back and forth. Ellie's heart pounded. She knew she couldn't stay here much longer. With a jolt, she yanked on the reins and led Charlie away from the glowing spot, back toward the barn. As she led him inside, the door creaked closed behind them, and Ellie felt a strange sense of unease settle over her. The barn was quiet, but the air was heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Charlie paced nervously inside his stall, his breath ragged, his eyes still reflecting the fear that had begun to settle deep within her own chest. Ellie sat down on a nearby bale of hay, clutching the stone in her palm. The stone's light had dimmed, but she could still feel its warmth. She didn't understand it, but she knew this was only the beginning. Something was coming. She could sense it in her bones. Whatever had happened to Charlie, whatever force had been awakened, it wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. The night had fallen heavily upon the farm, blanketing the land in thick darkness. Ellie sat in the dimly lit barn, still clutching the glowing stone tightly in her hand. The warmth that radiated from it seemed to pulse in sync with her heartbeat, a constant reminder that something far beyond her understanding was unfolding around her. Charlie, the majestic horse who had been her companion for so many years, was pacing nervously in his stall. His hooves scraped against the barn floor, and every so often he let out a low whinny. His eyes, usually calm and collected, were now wide with fear. Ellie had never seen him like this, terrified and unsettled, as though he knew something she didn't. It was as if the very air around them was charged with an unseen presence, and Charlie could sense it far better than she could. Ellie stood up, her legs stiff from sitting for so long, and made her way over to Charlie's stall. She placed a hand on his trembling shoulder, the warmth of his coat offering some comfort. But tonight, something was different. The bond they shared, strong and unbreakable, felt strained. She could feel his anxiety, a deep unease that mirrored her own. The barn was still and quiet, save for the soft rustle of hay and the faint creaking of wood. But Ellie felt an undeniable tension in the air. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, a force she couldn't name, something pulling her toward the unknown. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The strange stone, the inexplicable glow, the vision of the mysterious figure in the field. None of it made sense. And yet Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that it was all connected, that somehow this night was destined to change everything. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows of the barn. Ellie glanced toward the door, her heart racing. There was something out there, something calling to her. Without thinking, she grabbed Charlie's reins and led him out of the barn, her breath quickening as she stepped into the cold night air. The wind bit at her skin, but she hardly noticed. The world felt different now, as if it had shifted in some way she couldn't comprehend. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their leaves rustling in the wind, but everything else was still. The night was thick with an eerie silence, the kind that seemed to press in on her from all sides. Charlie was restless, his hooves scraping against the dirt as they walked. His head was low, and his body trembled slightly beneath Ellie's touch. She could feel the fear radiating off him, his anxiety growing with each step they took. Ellie tried to reassure him, but her voice faltered. She didn't know what to say, what to do. She could only keep moving forward, toward whatever awaited them in the field. They reached the spot where the strange light had appeared earlier. The ground beneath them was scorched, the earth still warm to the touch. The air felt heavy, thick with the same energy that had surrounded her earlier. Ellie's hand instinctively reached into her pocket, where the stone still pulsed with warmth. The closer they got to the center of the markings, the more intense the sensation became. It was as though the land itself was alive, thrumming with a power she couldn't understand. Suddenly, a loud whinny broke the silence. Ellie spun around, her heart leaping in her chest. Charlie was shaking now, his entire body trembling, as if caught in the grip of some unseen force. Ellie reached out to calm him, but her touch seemed to do little to ease his fear. He was staring at something, his wide eyes locked on the horizon. Ellie followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. At first it seemed like a shadow, just a flicker on the edge of her vision. But then, the shadow took shape, coalescing into something far more extraordinary. It was massive, its form unlike anything Ellie had ever seen before. A creature rising from the very earth itself, its body surrounded by a soft, ethereal glow. Ellie's pulse quickened as the figure continued to rise, its shape becoming clearer with each passing second. It was like a horse, but not like any horse she had ever known. Its coat shimmered with an otherworldly radiance, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Its mane flowed like liquid silver, sparkling as though it were made of stardust. But it was the creature's eyes that struck Ellie most of all. They were vast, endless pools of light, filled with ancient knowledge, as if the creature had witnessed the passing of centuries and carried the weight of time itself. Charlie's hooves scraped against the dirt, his body trembling. Ellie could feel the energy in the air intensify, swirling around her like a whirlwind. She stepped closer to Charlie, her hand still holding onto his reins, but the words she wanted to speak seemed stuck in her throat. What was happening? Who? What? Was this creature? The wind picked up, howling louder now, but Ellie remained frozen. It wasn't fear that gripped her. It was awe, pure, unbridled awe. The creature's gaze was fixed on her, and for a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then, as if acknowledging her presence, it lowered its head slowly, its gaze shifting toward Charlie. Ellie held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The creature's eyes met Charlie's, and for a moment, Ellie could have sworn she saw a flicker of recognition pass between them. It was as though the creature knew exactly what Charlie needed, knew exactly how to heal him. Slowly, with deliberate grace, the creature stepped forward, its hooves barely making a sound as it moved closer to Charlie. Ellie watched, transfixed, as the creature extended its head, its glowing mane brushing against the horse's side. At first, Charlie stood still, his body rigid with tension. But as the creature's energy enveloped him, a calm seemed to wash over him. The trembling in his body faded, replaced by a soothing, peaceful stillness. His breath slowed, his muscles relaxed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Charlie seemed at ease. Ellie's eyes welled with tears as she watched the miracle unfold before her. She had no words, no way to explain what was happening. It was as though time itself had slowed, and the world around her faded into the background. All that mattered in that moment was the bond between Charlie and the mysterious creature. The light around Charlie grew brighter, and Ellie could feel a sense of peace settle over the entire field. It was as though the land itself was breathing, exhaling a deep, calming sigh. The energy that had once felt so overwhelming now felt gentle, like a warm embrace. Ellie closed her eyes, allowing the serenity to wash over her. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the light began to fade. The creature stepped back, its body shimmering one last time before it dissolved into the night, leaving nothing behind but the lingering warmth of its presence. Charlie stood perfectly still, his body glowing faintly in the moonlight, his once anxious eyes now calm and content. The fear that had once gripped him was gone, replaced by a quiet strength that Ellie had never seen before. Ellie stood there for a long time, staring at Charlie, her heart still racing with the enormity of what had just occurred. She couldn't fully comprehend what had happened, how it had happened, but she knew one thing for certain, and it was all because she had trusted in something bigger than herself, something she couldn't see but had felt with every fiber of her being. As she walked slowly back toward the barn, Charlie by her side, Ellie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she had witnessed something extraordinary. And as the night sky stretched out above her, Ellie made a silent promise to honor the miracle that had unfolded before her. If you believe in the power of miracles and the unexplainable wonders of this world, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated with more incredible stories like this one. Share this video with your friends and family, because sometimes the most miraculous things happen when we least expect them. Let's keep believing in the unbelievable, and remember that there's always hope, even in the darkest of times.